Thank you, Maria. And welcome back, everybody. So we got even Floch on 8 wins coming in. Mike Sigrist on 10. These are going to be tracked over the course of our weekend, but then even going forward into the other league weekends as they are cumulative. They will be adding up over the course of the entire season. It's a long grind for these players as they're basically just trying to accumulate wins rather than the normal tiebreakers, top eights. Did I make it in? Did I not? This is a different look for many Magic players here. But these are the types of games and matches that these players are going to look back at, at the end of the season and think, I was so close. Could I have just beat Ivan Floch way back in round 4 in our second league weekend? Did I make a mistake? Was I focused? All of that kind of stuff. So every one of these is going to be really important. We see Sigrist kick things off with Kazandu Valley, as it looks like he's already got another mammoth in hand anyway. But first play of the game, Brushfire Elemental is going to get in for 1. How does Floch's hand look here, Eduardo?
It looks like it desperately wants access to more mana, but you do have cheap interaction in that Blood Cheese First as well as Essence Scatter. So even without access to more mana, you still get to interact. Deciding, interestingly, to just go for that Thought Thief to mill more cards, keep putting the shields down, but also getting an Ox in the graveyard. So this turn actually ended up really nicely for Mike Sigrist, even though it was in his own turn.
The best case scenario there. No land drop from Floch and the Ox is in the yard. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
You look at the smile on Ivan Floch's face too. He's like, this didn't go very well. And there's a removal spell even to take out the Soaring Thought Thief. And land drop's going to fire up the Brushfire Elemental, and there is a Triome off the top of the library here for Floch.
Yeah, I mean, there are 7 cards for Into the Story. That's why you see it be cheaper. But again, Ivan missing land drops and wanting to interact is going to probably mean that card is going to be actually a long way away, because before it even gets cast, I suspect we see Ox of Agonas come back. Mike is just trying to set up an aggressive draw, has access to Embercleave, which doesn't get interacted with by Essence Scatter. So here the choice for Ivan is, do I Blood Cheese first or go for that or keep up Essence Scatter?
Floch looks like he's going to lean towards the Bloodchief's Thirst here to get rid of this Brushfire Elemental. Right. Maintaining his life total seems to be a priority here. And we're going to see him get in as the 8th card is now in the graveyard. 3 damage comes through and the land drop with the passing of the turn. A productive turn for Floch, but boy, what a difference if that land was untapped here.
Oh yeah, for sure. Then it's an easy decision, right? You keep Essence Scatter up and you get to kill the creature. The decision to kill the Brushfire Elemental is one of deal with the problem you know about, even though it is a little less mana efficient. But also you just don't have an answer to Embercleave. So if you pass with Essence Scatter and Mike Sigrist decides to land an Embercleave, 4 of card in this version of Gruul, then you're just in major, major trouble. The main problem for Mike this turn is having access to only 1 spell, essentially. Unless, of course, you get extremely lucky off the Bone Crusher Giant. But yeah, with only access to 1 spell, it makes sense to deploy this Mammoth because it's essentially the most damage down the line. It works really well with Embercleave. And next turn, you can Stomp with Bone Crusher Giant and play it. Or you can have a hybrid turn of Stomp and Ox if you decide to lose the Embercleave.
There's land number 4 for Ivan Floch, and he is going to use that graveyard having been built up for Mike. Lulmage's Domination gets a significant discount of 3 there, and he can fire it off. Triple blue, I'll take that, Mammoth. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and that's kind of the challenge, right, with Ox is, yes, it is very good against Rogues. The problem in a trade-off like this is, for now, Rogues has those cards in the graveyard, right? They have, well, exactly 8 cards. You can't even escape the Ox right now.
Right.
But because of that, it means that Lulmage's Domination's turned on. or at least much cheaper and castable relevantly. And Into the Story is active. But the next card that goes into Mike's graveyard essentially allows the Ox of Agonis to escape.
That's right. And you can see that Mike has had to take a little bit of a different turn here after having that mammoth stolen by Ivan Floch on his turn. Now things are a little different, so he's going to get some value from the Edgewall Innkeeper off of the Bone Crusher Giant, plus Stomp to kill the Thieves Guild Enforcer. So a good turn there for Sigrist as well. He added a Bone Crusher Giant, took away a threat from the other side, and even drew an extra card in the deal. But once again, we see Lulmage's domination come down and complete the 2-for-1. This just keeps happening here. How many times can this happen before Mike gets too far behind?
I think the third time would be too much. At least there's a Lovestruck Beast, which is going to be able to easily stop this aggression. The problem with blocking... So the thing with Edgewall Innkeeper is the value of it has gone down just because Mike is very incentivized to escape Ox of Agonis sooner rather than later. Now, because of that, Edgewall Innkeeper loses value because you essentially have to get the Ox and then draw an adventure creature, so you can't really rely on the Lovestruck Beast here, since likely to have a scenario where you go Heart's Desire, Ox of Agonis, and then play it. It is cards, but potentially just worried about the damage in this scenario.
So he's going to soak up what is effectively preventing 5 damage there from Floch by chump blocking. But Floch did get to crack the land and grab a Wind Robber as well. So Floch with a little bit of a mana stumble earlier in the game, but has really been able to maximize ever since getting that graveyard loaded up. And here comes Ox of Agonis on the stack coming out of escape mode here, Eduardo. How big is this for Mike?
It's kind of a necessary evil. Like, yeah, you would have loved to land the Ember Cleave. The Brushfire Elemental's fine. It's not possible. But, it's going... The thing with those escape cards is... This is actually one of the nice things about coverage, is when you're playing matches, you're not actually sure how much of an effect it has. But because we're able to see both hands, right, you can tell that now this Into the Story isn't a castable card. So it's as if Mike has essentially not quite discarded the Into the Story, but just taxed it out of oblivion. And now Ivan's options are just restricted because you can't fire off Into the Story. That means you can't use the cards that came out of it. So it's as if this Ox of Agonis might as well have made Ivan Floch discard 4 cards.
Crazy. Here comes the Wind Robber. Mike flirted with the idea of maybe playing Scavenging Ooze with an activation available, but decided, no. I need to get the shields up here. I'm going to play my Lovestruck Beast and brick the attack on the ground here, especially given that there was no land from Floch, so even the Kazandu Mammoth is going to stay home.
Right. The other thing is you don't know yet how you want to manage your graveyard, because if the Lovestruck Beast was taken down by something like a Heartless Act here, that would have been an extra card. The attack comes in, you trade with Ox. That's a lot of extra cards in the graveyard that might plan for a second escape for this Ox of Agonis. So that's why you also play the Lovestruck Beast, is you essentially get to set up that scenario of trading a bunch of your resources, but being able to reload in 2 turns' time.
Kind of interesting. It did actually look for a second like Mike was going to be facing down a scenario where he had a ton of cards in his graveyard, perhaps for another Ox or whatever, because of the Ruin Crab, but there was no land follow-up for Ivan, so it was just 0-3 your move, at least for this turn.
Yeah. And the consideration with Ruin Crab, essentially it's the best way to look at it is it's a Black Lotus for Into the Story. That's how Ruin Crab functions right now is.
Yeah, I mean, is it a liability at this point for Floch to fill up Mike's yard any further, or does he need to get it back up to full mode?
I think at 13 life and with a Wind Robber, it's okay. Because you get to essentially potentially tempo out. Like, if you get to cast the Into the Story and draw 4 cards during the short window before the Ox gets cast, at least you've reloaded. And then Ruin Crab reloads the graveyard very easily. Anything like a Fabled Passage would definitely do the job.
Right. Well, Mike is going to run out Questing Beast. That's going to get countered by Essence Scatter. So now he's going to go to combat. He's going to send in with the Lovestruck Beast and the Ox. And it looks like we're going to see a double block here on the Lovestruck Beast from Ivan. Interestingly, those are both creatures that were once Mike's. I'll double block with your own creature. It's pretty rough.
Right, but that's why Lol Mage's domination is so good in this matchup.
Yeah,
I think
really
without
impressive.
Oxyvagonus, like in the main deck, this would be probably quite rough in game one for Mike Sigrist. But the Ox is really that choice of the flex slot being Ox has given Mike the chance to win this game.
Mike decided to play his land there rather than waiting for, I guess, another red source to appear. I don't know. Oh, he has got a mountain. What was the deal with playing that land there, I wonder?
You have Oxyvagonus in hand, so
Just
you're
want to
gonna
be able to
reload
spend the
anyway. So
mana.
you just want
Hmm.
more mana, right? Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Plus Scavenging Ooze. So the more if you have extra red mana that can be used to cast spells, and then Scavenging Ooze can manage your own graveyard. Ivan's Fabled Passage Ruin Crab is going to mean a ton of cards though, which is going to be it's going to be difficult for Mike to kind of manage your own graveyard in this spot. So Ivan is going to be able to fire off this into the story, and at this point the game is relatively even because Ivan's going to fire off into the story. Then we're probably going to see Mike fire off Oxyvagonus. So pretty heavy reloads on both sides, and kind of depending on what's drawn is going to define the texture. But because Ivan will be the one with the cards first, probably slight edge to Ivan in this spot.
Yeah, also, I think it's worth noting that generally speaking, Ivan has cheaper cards, right? Like, can probably be able to deploy the cards drawn with the end of the story, not just having deployed the end of the story faster than Mike will be able to, at least in some scenarios. Oh, there's a
How
Brushfire Elemental.
It's actually a close consideration. I was gonna say there's a strange draw where you could draw Red Source Embercleave, and that would probably
Oh.
lock up the game. The thing is,
Hmm.
Mike is facing open mana, but there's only one card. So if you did go for that plan and ended up having a removal spell pointed at your creature, then you know at least that Ivan has no more cards. If it's
Right.
into the story, that's the best thing you could do, right? Because it's helping you take over the game in a spot where it might be more difficult. But you're losing a pretty juicy two drop that just perfectly matches into this turn. So it makes sense to just deploy it because you're not in a horrible position that forces this kind of play where you have to take those chances. So I kind of agree with this play, especially if you draw something like a Fabled Passage. You can then make the Brushfire Elemental a 5/5 and go through the Bone Crusher Giant cleanly.
Mike's going to play for the here and now. Now he's going to run out Oxyphagonus. Yvonne can only look on. All right. Well, it ended up being Kazandu Mammoth, as well as a Bone Crusher Giant and a Rimrock Knight. He's going to play the land, though. That'll get that trigger on the Brushfire Elemental and at least encourage a trade from Floch.
Right. You want to get in the damage right away. I don't think there's much time to deploy this Mammoth. And between Rimrock Knight and Bone Crusher Giant, Mike Sigrist has access to plenty of things to do.
Woo! Look at that. Thieves Guild Enforcer off of the end of the story was, I think, the only one mana spell he could cast here that matters.
Right. There's a Cling to Dust, but this is clearly like very good because it trades for a creature. The main problem Ivan has to take account of is that Ox of Agonis essentially you're gonna have to trade with one of these at some point, and Mike will be able to essentially escape it, which does turn off a few cards.
As it turns out, it's going to be Merfolk Windrobber is going to do the old block and sack, and the two other creatures are going to trade off. So the Thieves Guild Enforcer will now come down onto the battlefield rather than having traded off for the Ox. Ooh, there's Cling to Dust and Blood Chief's Thirst with another copy of Into the Story, kind of chaining them together. The real bottleneck for Floch this thus far has been mana. As you know, once you go into the story, into another end of the story, the advantage really does start to get out of control. The question is just, can you deploy the cards in a timely fashion?
Right. When your card draw doesn't generate mana, then of course you have to make that trade-off, right, of deciding of essentially having to play your card draw, then trying to catch up. That's where this Rogues deck tries to do it. Is I have Lurrus. I have a bunch of cheap 1 and 2 mana spells. So if I'm spending 4 mana to draw 4 cards, I get the chance to essentially deploy them all in time.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say here that the main considerations are how you wish to use your card advantage. I don't think there's an easy way to get rid of both Oxes in a way in this turn, so you're not probably going to do Cling plus Cling Escape. The 2 card advantage routes are essentially Lurrus plus something like getting the Wind Robber back or firing off the Into the Story. I do like getting rid of the Scavenging Ooze, though, because that's going to be the biggest problem. I think with the Lurrus still requiring companion mana, I wouldn't be surprised to see an Into the Story fired off, just because that gives you the largest amount of options.
Mm-hmm. And certainly sets you up for a big next turn. There's an Edgewall Innkeeper off the top of the library here for Siggy.
Yeah, and the trade-off with playing the Blood Chiefs first on the Scavenging Ooze there was, well, I'm going to be cold potentially to an Embercleave, but at least I have Cling to Dust, and hopefully I can draw into one if I need it. But if I get to survive this turn, I then fire off this Into the Story and remove the Fret efficiently.
Sigrist scoping the scene here. He has Stomp that he can use to take out the Thieves Guild Enforcer. That seems like step 1, and that's what he's going to do here.
Yeah, really good. Clears the way. Doesn't let Ivan into the scenario of trading with an Ox and then after damage playing the Cling to Dust before we get to second main phase. And that Edgewall Innkeeper was actually a really nice draw for Mike. It wasn't quite Embercleave, different cards. But it does allow the reload and to keep putting on the pressure.
Different cards indeed.
Not quite the same. They actually do have good synergy together, as just because, creature and attacking.
So this is a lethal attack here from Sigrist. So that is going to prompt some type of action from Floch. It could be a chump block. It could be Cling to Dust to gain some life. Either way, he would survive narrowly.
Yeah, I would guess we're seeing a block on the 5/3, but it makes sense to fire off the Into the Story first because you might draw a Thieves Guild Enforcer.
He could block Crab on 1/1 and then just Cling, right? 9, that would put him at 11. He'd go to 2. Boy, that is some dangerous stuff, though. The Rimrock Knight, in this case, would actually finish him off. So if that's the case, plus you have to worry about potential other Bone Crusher Giants or anything like that. Oh, uh-oh.
Oh, this is going to be... I mean, I understand the block from Ivan. It's probably trying to set up for a longer-term plan, and if there's extra damage, then so be it.
He's going to die here, isn't he?
Yeah, because the plan is to Cling to Dust the creature, go to 11, and this is 9, plus 2 is also 11. So yeah, we're going to game 2. And really, this came down to that Ox of Agonas being milled. That choice from Mike Sigrist to put that card in the main deck meant that Lull Mage's domination was... Normally, main deck, that card would be incredible, but it had to be fired off sooner rather than later.
All right. Well, we're going to head into sideboards here, or the players are going to head into the sideboards. But for us, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back with more right after this. And welcome back to our coverage here of the League Weekend. We're just heading into game number 2 between Mike Sigrist and Ivan Floch. We're in round 4. Going to be covering 6 rounds total today, and then the other 6 tomorrow will be featuring the MPL players. Boy, that Ox of Agonas really was the all-star, wasn't it?
Right. Especially in game 1, right? Because game 1 is like a Cling to Dust, and your whole deck plan against Gruul is I'll get them to 8 cards, and then I can just fire a bunch of Into the Stories. and Lull Mage's Domination. So I think Ivan actually played those Lull Mage's Dominations at the right time, but being tempoed out on the Into the Story and having Mike capable of essentially reloading the hand with, while destroying the Rogue's game plan was pretty strong.
Mike's going to kick things off this time with Heart's Desire. Get in there for one, has to decide what to do on turn 2, and it looks like he's going to play an untapped Shatter Skull Smashing here. So that way he can fire off Stomp if he'd like. He decides not to.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, when you're doing that, you're telling Ivan what's up. And Ivan, knowing that there's a Stomp, doesn't want to fire off these Thief Guild's Enforcers. Even though it would be a bunch of cards, it's just not enough for Into the Story, and you can wait an extra turn.
Yeah, a little awkward there for Sigrist, as he telegraphed it at the cost of 3 life, but then that also gave Floch enough information to know not to deploy what he happened to have in hand. And Mike just ended up not firing off the Stomp at all, would rather leave it in his hand for a creature down the line. And he's going to go for Lovestruck Beast instead. So a perfectly fine start here, kind of forcing the issue on this Essence Scatter from Floch. He fires it off, and that's going to leave Mike with just the 1/1. But the Thieves Guild Enforcer also gets to hit for Floch, and this last 2-turn sequence has worked out well for Yvonne.
Right, but it was that patience, right? Like there's probably a 2 damage removal spell coming up, and your Thieves Guild Enforcer would go down. So that's quite good. Also, this Essence Scatter does allow the 7th card to come, but if a Thief Guild Enforcer is played, but that you couldn't fire the Into the Story, and that would be quite mana inefficient. So that's why I think we see Lurrus come to hand. If Ivan can draw an untapped land, that would actually be a really strong step forward.
Interesting to see the Lurrus come down rather than the second Enforcer. Here comes Klothys, God of Destiny, though, out of the sideboard here for Sigrist, going to wreak havoc with the graveyard.
I mean, the main thing that card does is it just says, look, this game is going to end. There's not a lot of life gain in the Rogues deck. So it does manage the graveyard, but more importantly, it just deals pressure turn after turn in a way that the Rogues deck can't handle. Some Rogues decks play Petty Theft or Brazen Borrow, rather. But outside of that, Mike is just going to make sure this Klothys is, not animated for Lull Mage's Domination. That would not be ideal. But outside of that, it's just going to deal damage turn after turn, and it's really hard for the Rogues deck to race it because of that just incidental life gain.
And worth noting here that Floch does not have a copy of Petty Theft, so that won't be or Brazen Borrow, I should say, that won't be a factor in this particular game. Was there a land for Floch? Oh, it was a tap land.
Yeah. The tap land there was really... An untapped land would have been really important, right? You get that Fields Guild Enforcer. You get to fire off Into the Story, as Mike has exactly 7 cards. So that's going to mean that Mike can't fire off a Ox of Agonis if that got milled. And as it stands... Ivan just doesn't have much that can be done. He can't fire off the Into the Story. Bloodchief's First is pretty poor. So we might just see this double Thieves Guild Enforcer.
Which is still not quite enough. Is that right?
No, I think it's 1 card off. Yeah, it's exactly 7 because Into the Story costs 4 mana and the Thieves Guild are 1/1s. But yeah, and you're playing also Lurrus into a Stomp. But that said, turn 5 is actually pretty important for the Gruul decks because of the access to Vivian Monsters Advocate. It's okay to kind of fire off this Lurrus at this point because Ivan has access to more than enough card advantage. It's a way to make sure you're using your resources. And if their turn 5 is essentially Stomp plus play Bone Crusher Giant, that's kind of okay. It allows you to play Into the Story and hopefully get ahead.
Is there any way for Mike to get the Ox of Agonis going here? No, right?
Right. Because we're at 7 cards, so you could put the 8th, but then you're 1 card short.
Right. So close, because that would have been really nice as well. Just to put those into the stories into 7 mana range for a long time. As it stands now, that is card number 8 going into the yard with Fabled Passage.
Yeah. And it's pretty... And you saw the Stomp before Klothys' ability to get rid of Lurrus from something like Agadeem's Awakening.
Mm-hmm. Well, This is kind of what Ivan Floch lives for, though. He gets to untap with these card draw spells, and they're ready to go. End of the story only costs 4 right now, and he's going to have to manage his resources carefully, but this is kind of the edge that he likes to live on.
Yeah, and I mean, Ivan is happy with exactly 8 cards in Mike's graveyard. That is the perfect amount.
No more, no less.
No more, no less. A 9th card would allow Ox to escape. A 7th card less would mean these are 1/1s instead of free twos with Death Touch. So yeah, I'd be surprised not to see an Into the Story Fire, to be honest. But there was just that decision: do I want to filter what I draw first or not?
Right, and that is the case. Of course, that means that you give up your ability to have drawn a land, an untapped land, and perhaps use the mana.
But actually, the perfect card on top in Cling to Dust, right? You get to go into the story and get rid of this Ox.
That is exactly what you want to see here. Here's Klothys from Mike, who drew the Great Henge.
Right. Now have access to a powerful card, either the Great Henge or Vivian Monster's Advocate. And it's worth noting, Mike doesn't necessarily know the contents of Ivan's hand, right? Like, you suspect Into the Story, but you're not sure. We might see a card removed here because that would make, Drown in the Loch against the Great Henge it needs a lot of work. And you successfully, by exiling your own card, manage to avoid that. You're at 8 cards, but if you're worried about something like removal plus counterspell, you could exile one of your own cards here.
Looks like Mike wants the mana.
Actually, kind of interesting. Oh, right, with the great henge. That's, let's see, we're at 5, 6, 7. That's still 1 off, right?
From what?
From casting Vivian Monster's Advocate off this great henge.
For both of them, yes, that is correct.
It does allow to escape Ox of Agonis, though, if in some scenarios. So if this got countered plus you attacked in a trait, then your Bone Crusher Giant would not die because that.
Okay.
So that would be the idea behind the mana.
Well, there's a Great Henge on the battlefield, though. Ivan Floch with no answer for it currently, and we're not going to see an answer for it likely either. So the Great Henge could very well take over.
Right. That said, both players essentially have their heavy draw engines, but Ivan's definitely going to have to be the aggressor. Between Klothys, God of Destiny, and the Great Henge, the Gruul deck will eventually pull ahead. It'll take a while. It won't be immediate, but eventually the Gruul deck pulls ahead. So and your life total is dwindling. You don't have access to Lurrus of the Dream Den because that got exiled by Klothys. So when your life gain is Cling to Dust, I mean, that's only going to last so long. So you pretty much have Ivan as the aggressor here.
Not a position that Ivan is used to being in for the most part. And also, this Rogues deck, well, yes, sometimes it does actually have those curves where you see it put significant pressure on the opponent when they're slow. That isn't the case here by any stretch, especially post-board where Floch looks like he's really made this more into a Dimir control deck than anything.
Yeah. Right, because you have access to Law Mage's Domination and heavy card draw, right? So, but those cards cost a lot, so to do that, you need time. Klothys gives you some time, but not a ton. This Cling to Dust is actually pretty technical because you do want to get rid of this Ox, but that's also the 7th card. So it would mean that you can't fire off Into the Story next turn. You were a card off anyways, Lull Mage's Domination.
Right. I don't. It feels like Floch needs to affect the board here. Technically, with the land drop, he will have 7 mana to cast Into the Story, even though it's at full price. But it just feels like what you mentioned before, the luxury of time isn't really on his side.
Right. That said, if Mike draws a blank, that is the worst. That is not a blank. That is the reverse of a blank.
That is an excellent draw there. A creature primarily, right? That's just what you want to see when you have the Great Henge out. And this could lead to a lot of cards going into hand for Sigrist.
Right. If that edge, plus you have the Vivian Monsters Advocate, so you can lead with that essentially, and then play cards off the top. And if it doesn't work out, you always have Edgewall Innkeeper to go a card deeper. So I mean, that combination, the Great Henge, Vivian, and any creature is pretty strong. But I can understand starting with the Edgewall Innkeeper since Vivian would tie a lot of your mana anyway, so it's unlikely that you're going to play a bunch of creatures off the top with her.
Here we go. A slightly larger Edgewall Innkeeper is going to trigger the Great Henge, but it is a land that goes into hand here for Sigrist.
Yeah. There is actually a pretty dangerous spot here for Mike. If you play Vivian this turn, Klothys becomes a creature.
Oh no, like a stealable creature?
Yeah, something you could rob.
Oh. And then does the rules work that you steal it, then it goes back to an enchantment, but it's still on your side?
It should be, right? Because you target it as a creature, but then you have control of it. So I would guess that it sticks around. And that's going to be actually a pretty important part of this is, yes, Vivian's very powerful. And, with the Great Henge and a bunch of lands, declining to play it is problematic. But Ivan Floch's at 8, and you're making that decision. Because if you're not going to play this Vivian, you are losing a lot, right? Because you're also admitting to not play kind of almost anything else.
He didn't play it, and Floch actually gets a little bit of wiggle room here to fire off a full price into the story and maybe get back into this thing. Huge pressure, though, on multiple axes here from Sigrist.
Right. The Klothys here being... Right. I mean, it is a 4-turn clock, especially with Sigrist being pretty aggressive on removing Lurrus and Cling to Dust. Essentially, Ivan doesn't have access to a bunch of life gain. So, but every time there was an option to remove something that could even possibly gain life, Mike aggressively went after it.
Seems like he really is leaning on this Klothys game plan. Now, with a land drop here from Floch, that would bump that graveyard up to 8, or above 8, I should say, for Mike Sigrist. And then that kicks in the reduction on the Lol Mage's domination as well. And we could see that Klothys switch hands, maybe next turn if he opens the door.
Right. I mean,
can Floch afford to not fire off domination on something here?
I think so. It's not like there's a ton of pressure. You can trade a Thieves Guild Enforcer for Bone Crusher Giant, and this Edgewall Innkeeper is being off the table. So, also, Mike is at 21 life. It's going to be difficult to deal damage. It does add up quickly, though. Thieves Guild Enforcer plus that Saurian Thought Thief on the top of the library is a lot of damage per turn.
I'm really curious to see how far Mike can take this. I'm not going to play Vivian to keep my Klothys unstealable thing. Like, there's a brick off the top just to land. Klothys is going to trigger here. So Mike just doesn't have any other plays other than to play Vivian or not.
Right. I mean, and Vivian
how dedicated are you,
Yeah, and I mean, the problem, I guess, is that it doesn't really matter whether Mike plays Vivian or not, in the sense that actually knowing both hands Vivian is purely a liability, because Ivan has access to negate. So if Vivian was good for Ivan, it would resolve. That would actually tell us a lot about how Ivan views this match if Vivian was cast.
Right. We know where Mike's at. Mike is on the Klothys plan here, and he showed his dedication to that plan last turn by not casting Vivian, even though he had the option. Does he cast it here?
This is a much better spot, right? The Bone Crusher Giant's off the table, so Klothys doesn't. So it definitely gets cast here, but here Ivan should negate this because the Klothys wouldn't become a creature, so for sure this is going to get negated.
Okay, so Vivian's going to hit the bin, and now can Ivan Floch turn the tables here because he's down to 6 facing down to Klothys and really needs to start generating advantage. I mean, Mike is gaining, 4 life a turn at this point while chipping away at Floch's life total for 2? It's going to be
Yeah,
pretty tough to race here.
right. I mean, the best way to race it is essentially to mill Mike out.
Right. And we have seen that happen where, there's these explosive turns. Does Floch have Agadim's Awakening? Let me take a quick look here.
All the rogue decks pretty much have to play that card. It's just too good.
Yeah, they've got 3 of them in this list. We've seen turns where you bring in, some combinations of Thieves Guild Enforcers to add the 3rd one to the board, plus another Soaring Thought Thief, a bunch of triggers, then an attack and a bunch of triggers, and all of a sudden 20 cards are gone in one turn. But right now, Sigrist sitting at 26 cards in library and only 4 life left for Floch.
Yeah, and I mean, you saw Mike go after Thieves Guild Enforcer. I think Mike feels in control of this game. So
Yeah,
at this point, it's just, okay, how do I not lose? And the thing with this Shatter Skull smashing is a good way to lose might be Agadim's Awakening. So you do want to play the smashing in a way where you don't get milled out, but you don't want to make Agadim's Awakening worse. So if you got rid of something like Ruin Crab and the Soaring Thought Thief, that would end up in a position where even if there is Agadim's Awakening, you're losing only 2 extra cards. If you got rid of the Thieves Guild Enforcer, it's same scenario more or less, but you're taking less damage because it's 2 rather than 4.
okay.
Yeah.
Looks like he's going to squish the Crab and the Thieves Guild Enforcer.
Yeah. Yeah, by far the best card Ivan could draw is a Cling to Dust, because that would give a ton of time between targeting whatever card Clothis targets, the extra life gain from exiling creatures, and escaping your own graveyard.
And TikTok says Clothis here on for Sigrist. It is just sitting there dominating this battlefield. This draw has not produced as much advantage as the last one did for Sigrist, but Clothis has been absolutely key.
Yeah, and I mean, all that came back to Mike's decision to not play Vivian earlier, never exposing Clothis as a creature.
Yeah.
That was important.
Super, super clutch. Mike knows how to play these control decks, and even the Gruul deck can be a control deck sometimes. And I mean, look at this. Mike has just horrendously flooded out here, and it doesn't seem like it's going to matter. He just needs to survive for another turn, basically.
Right? There's no answer to Clothis. The only one is really Cling to Dust. So one was played. So however many Cling to Dust are in Ivan's deck, that's the amount of outs. That's it. There are no other cards that are going to matter.
Mike Sigrist is up a game in the match. He's got 10 wins total in league play. And yeah, I just keep going back to that same turn that you mentioned there, Eduardo. Just Sigrist definitely not playing out Vivian, even with the mana available to do so. And boy, has that paid off. Now we're going to see Ox of Agonis get escaped.
It's less relevant here than it would have been in other spots, just because there's going to be enough cards anyways for these Soaring Thought Thieves to be good. But it might get something like a Scorching Dragonfire. Obviously, a Stomp would end the game. And it's not enough cards that Mike's worried, right? Mike was checking. There were 21 cards, which would get you to 17, which is fine. There's not really a single card that Ivan could draw, even if Mike bricked completely, that would get rid of all those cards at the end.
Really well done here by Mike Sigrist. Putting the finishing touches on a very nice game too, where he's really stranded Little Mage's domination in hand. He's going to go for Scorching Dragonfire here because why not? He even has a backup Clothis in hand now too, but he knows the deck list, and he knows that there's really no way out for Floch at this point. And boom, Mike Sigrist picks up the match 2-0, thanks to really a combination, Eduardo, of tricky deck building, right? We saw the 2 copies of Ox of Agonis, and they came up huge for him in the first game. Those are in the main deck, and then really clever play there by not playing out his Planeswalker.
Right. The 2 decisions that two big decisions that were rewarded. In game one, that deck building decision to have Ox of Agonis in the main deck. Sometimes you win matches because you make those decisions before the match even starts. So that way, when the match begins, you actually manage to lock up the game because of that key decision you made. So game one came down to, I think, deck building fundamentally. To make the flex slot that Ox of Agonis, if that was a Vivian or something, I'm not sure Mike would have been able to win that game.
Right.
And game two came down to being patient, understanding the matchup, not just playing the Clothis, but also protecting it from being a creature from Lol Mage's domination, plus getting rid of any potential avenue to victory that Ivan Floch had, whether that was turbo milling with a bunch of Fees Guild Enforcers or any life gain. The second there was anything that resembled life gain, Mike Sigrist went after it hard. So
cut off those avenues right away, and it paid off. Clothis closes out the game for Mike. We had a chance actually to have a chat with Mike right now.
Hey everybody, I'm here with Mike Sigrist, who just won his match versus Ivan Floch, playing some Gruul Adventures. How do you feel about that deck choice for this weekend?
I feel pretty good about it. There's actually, my slate of matches is a lot less mirrors, and I don't think there's many decks that actually beat it unless you only want to beat that. Everything else, I built decks that could beat it, but they couldn't beat anything else. So you're kind of in a squeeze. Play Gruul or lose to Gruul, or lose to everything else.
So I've got to ask you too, you're running 2 Ox of Agonis main deck. That seemed to be probably a pretty good choice, especially for your last matchup versus Rogues.
Yeah, that was exactly what it was there for. I found that Ox isn't that bad in the mirrors, anyways. So like Vivian is kind of the standard choice in that slot, but you don't have to draw the Ox; they'll draw it for you, putting it in the graveyard, all that stuff against Rogues, which we thought about halfway through testing might be the second most popular deck. I don't think that was true. I think Doom Foretold, it's also good there. So we went with Ox instead of Vivian and kind of just swapped from the normal setup.
So for you here, we're in the second weekend of league play. What has it been like? What's the competition like playing here in the Rivals?
It's tough. People don't make mistakes. It's hard. You especially with like open deck lists. People make even less mistakes, myself included. You don't play into things and stuff like that, so it makes it hard to like test on the ladder and stuff like that, because I could have Ox in my deck and my opponent doesn't know that, and they're playing Rogues and they're just gonna go nuts milling me.
Right.
I'm going to hit an Ox and I'm going to win or whatever. So it's tough. It's tough when everyone's playing, near perfect Magic all the time. It's hard to get wins.
What's it like just playing from home? I know sometimes we get to see your kids in the background jumping on your bed. Have they stopped doing that, or do you still just got to keep the door closed with a note on it?
Yeah. Right now I have my door locked. They're not home. Mom took them for a ride. For now, but yeah, I mean, it's even in round one, I had like music playing in the background to distract from the noise that was outside, just to try to stay focused on my matches. I mean, now we're playing for points and staying in the league and stuff like that. Now that the half season from before that got put on hold is live, so this counts, and I want to make sure that I'm fully focused on it.
Do you think it's more stressful playing at home versus playing, like you normally would at a GP or something like that?
It's more stressful because of the setup, where every match counts. For instance, like when it was like the Grand Prix was part of the pro circuit, you could, mess up, whatever. You lost the tournament, but you had more opportunities, right? You got to get to like 6 or whatever amount of Grand Prix you could count, and you could just say, all right, now I'm just going to take another weekend because I messed this weekend up. Now everything matters. Every match counts. So you really want to be focused and get every last one, because you don't know, that one point could make the difference.
Speaking of being at home all the time, I've got to ask, have you picked up any new pandemic hobbies or anything like that now that you're spending more time at home?
Yeah, I guess I play MMOs more.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I used to play them, in my early 20s or whatever, specifically Final Fantasy 11, and I picked it back up whatever, like 6 months ago or something, or less than that, 4 months ago. Just because, I'm home all the time, need something to do.
Gamers got a game, man.
Exactly.
Mike Sigrist, best of luck to you the rest of the weekend, and in fact, in all of the Rivals Leagues. Thanks for talking with me.
Thank you. Hi, Mom.
Hello and welcome to The Bold, the rapid-fire introduction to the most exciting players in Magic. And right now, I'm joined by member of Team CFB, Reed Duke. Reed, how are you doing?
Hey, James. I'm doing pretty well. Happy to be here.
Great. I'll get straight into some questions. What is the best color of mana?
I'm a big fan of green mana.
What's the best color combo?
Green and black, for sure. I wasn't sure whether I was going to answer green or black to your previous question, but this one is a no-brainer.
Makes it nice and easy. What's your least favorite color combo? What do you never want to play?
I'd say, probably blue and red, because it's more about like finesse, and I'm much more of like, I want to drop the hammer and just have the biggest creature on the battlefield.
What's your favorite tribe in Magic?
Elves, for sure.
Do you prefer aggro or control?
Good question. I guess if I had to choose only one to play for the rest of my life, it'd be control, though I do enjoy the variety.
What's your favorite format?
Limited. I like to play sealed deck in particular.
Who's an MPL or Rivals player who is scary to play against?
Well, I almost never beat Huey William Jensen, so that's probably the pairing that I'm really crossing my fingers to not get, for round one of the league play weekend.
Is there anyone you want to play against that you think you've got a good game against?
That I have a good game against. It's more about like challenging myself. Like, I'm really quite looking forward to the league play weekend because there's nothing I enjoy more in Magic than like pitting myself against the toughest opponents and just seeing what happens. So, I wouldn't really go to good matchups so much as like I'm looking for a tough game and somebody who's going to bring their best against me.
And one more question, Reed. Where can we find you online?
Well, all my written and video content winds up on channelfireball.com. I also stream sometimes at twitch.tv/readerrabbit.
Hey everybody, welcome back to coverage of MTG League Weekend. I'm Maria Bartholdi. Thank you so much for hanging out with us wherever you are around the world as we watch the Rivals players do battle here this weekend. MPL will be up next tomorrow, so if you want to see some MPL matches right here, that is the day to check that out. Well, let's take a look at our feature match here. We've got another match for you here from round number 4. We've got Zachary Keeney versus Toralf Severin. Zachary Keeney, known for his Grand Prix success. He's got 3 top 8s to his name in those tournaments. And Toralf Severin, of course, a mythic champion. Gruul Adventures versus Gruul Adventures. So we're going to see who can potentially adventure better. Let's take a look at Keeney's deck list here. Eduardo, what are you looking for in the mirror match?
The cards that people have kind of used to get an edge in the mirror match are cards like Fire Prophecy, the Akroan War, and as you notice, the cards I've named are not here. So that said, we will go to Toral's lists, and there are only 2 Fire Prophecies there. So in game 1, it's actually not that easy to edge in the mirror unless you're playing the Akroan War. I think that's probably the highest power level card that you can have in the main deck for the mirror match. But post-board, that's really what's going to matter because Zach has access to free the Akroan Wars. And in the post-board games, also 2 Scorching Dragonfires can come in with free Vivian Monsters Advocate, so it can really almost transform into Gruul Control and just out mid-range a little bit Toral Spilled and take that edge. As you can see the cards there, something like Will could also be really nice to avoid dying to an Embercleave or outvaluing to the Great Henge.
Let's take a peek now at Toralf Severin's list. Of course, we said this is a mirror. It's Gruul Adventures. Yet again, anything you want to point out here, Eduardo?
We've seen these Gruul decks a lot. A card that I wanted to mention quickly was the Embereth Shieldbreaker. That's kind of we've seen Rimnog Knights in some of these lists, but I've seen Shieldbreaker as kind of this way to not just lose to the Great Henge. in the mirror match if it does come down, right? So, and even though it's got a Goblin Piker impression, sometimes you can go Edgewell Innkeeper into just playing it on turn 2 and drawing a card and keeping the cards flowing, and that's totally acceptable. Not really a card against Embercleave, just to note, since you usually die to that first, but it showcases that the Great Henge is a card that matters a lot. And I think, though, that those Poor Sport games are going to favor Zachary just because of that extra copy of the Akron War, extra copy of Vivian, a little more cheap interaction. And that's going to I think, help in the mirror match. But, of course, it's a mirror. It's really close. Whoever's on the play is going to be quite favored in game 1.
All right, well, we are actually starting in game number 2, so let's head on down to the match. Mr. Manowar, Marshall Sutcliffe, take it away.
Thanks, Maria, and welcome back, everybody. Toralf Severin on the bottom part of your screen has 9 wins versus Zachary on 7. Now, I'll remind you, this is game number 2 as we come in with Zachary Keeney having picked up the first game.
Yeah.
And let's see who can get out to that quick start sooner.
Here, there was already a difficult decision on turn 1 that we kind of went through quickly, but of Heart's Desire or Edgewell Innkeeper. It's actually closer than it appears because a lot of the times in this matchup, you want to keep your Innkeeper for turn 4 because it allows you to go turn 3, turn 4, Innkeeper, Adventure Creature, draw card, always have advantage, especially in a matchup where your opponent very likely has cards like Scorching Dragonfire and Stomp. But I think with Toralf's hand, having Embercleave, that was the deciding factor to play the Innkeeper. Is I don't think Toralf sees having that time, so really wanted to get both 2/1/1s on the table to allow Lovestruck Beast to kind of attack guaranteed, make those cards flow. But it is a higher risk play, and it backfired here.
It did, yeah. It looks like he did provide a beautiful stomp target there in the Edgewell Innkeeper, and it did, in fact, get stomped. So it's going to get out of here. Here comes Lovestruck Beast, and you can see the boards are equal here, but look at the adventure zone there for Zachary Keeney sitting there with the Bone Crusher Giant at the ready. That's the difference.
This is a really difficult turn for Toralf because you could fire off Embercleave and make Lovestruck Beast essentially attack for 12, but you have to do so.
I like that idea.
Yeah, but you have to attack with the 1/1 human, and then Lovestruck Beast might be crying at home with an Embercleave attached, which is kind of the saddest, essentially 12 damage creature that ever got printed.
Seriously.
But your opponent already is the card ahead because of that stomp, and something like the Great Henge is going to be problematic. So this might be a high risk, high reward play because because Toralf might feel behind enough that you have to make that play. Well, the alternative here would be doing something like just playing the Bone Crusher Giant as a 4/3 and then setting up for Embercleave next turn more safely. But I like this. It is taking a large risk, but you could draw the Great Henge, and that gets your card right away. You could draw 1/1, and that gets you a chance to win this game. So I think this is a heads-up play from Toralf, but we might see a game where Toralf just doesn't draw a 1/1, and then it looks awful. But I just want to highlight that risk now.
Yeah, it's interesting because Toralf has basically taken the higher risk line twice now, and so far, well, it hasn't worked out for him. I mean, he did get in for a huge chunk. It wasn't like there was no upside to that line that he took regardless. But now, well, he gets to fire off Stomp and a Bone Crusher, so not too bad. But he will not be able to attack with the Beast, and that's really the critical juncture here from Keeney's perspective, because now he knows, okay, I get to survive and have my Great Henge actually start doing things.
Right, and this was kind of the safety plan. I get to yeah.
Oh
sorry.
No!
I was going to say the safety plan is you get the Bone Crusher Giant, right, equipped with Embercleave, but yeah, that was probably one of the best possible cards that could ever be drawn there. That was really a good turn.
Wow, a Crowan War is going to hit the battlefield, and funny enough, it's not even going to bother stealing the Embercleaved up Lovestruck Beast because it can't attack for Keeney either, so he's going to take the Bone Crusher Giant.
Also, there's just not much that can be done, and I guess the battlefield is buffering, but we get to see the cards in hand from the other side, and that Wilt is really going to lock up the game, I think.
Yeah, it looks like a big attack here as we zip forward a turn. Apologies for that. It looks like it did buffer a little bit here, but Zachary Kinney is attacking.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a bad sign here for Toralf Zevran as we see Wilt hit the opposing Embercleave. And are we going to see the Embercleave come down for Kinney as well? Is there room here for that?
I would think so. The Great Henge
Yeah.
does do a lot of mana. And
There it is.
That's also why you see Toralf not necessarily firing off the Wilt, is you get more information. There was the opportunity to fire off Wilt against the Great Henge, but you could, if you're okay with giving your opponent the mana, you could wait until a creature gets cast.
Really rough spot here for Toralf as this is the best case scenario, and he's still trading off his creature and taking 4 damage, leaving him with no board, facing down an opponent with the Great Henge on the battlefield. It's going to make life very difficult for Zevran here.
At least you get the Bone Crusher Giant back, so, still need to draw a creature. So, I mean, yeah, Toralf is really far behind, but, all it takes is a turn or two of the right cards being drawn on both sides. But yeah, this is not looking good for Toralf at all.
So he went end-step Bone Crusher Giant upstairs. He did find Lovestruck Beast. He also has Shatterskull Smashing in his hand. Unfortunately for him, not enough mana to make it great. Meanwhile, Keeney has Shatterskull Smashing in hand as well, with enough mana to make it great.
Yeah, especially with the Bone Crusher Giant being given back, we might see it fired off this turn, especially if it's a blank off the top.
How about another Shatterskull Smashing off the top of the library here?
Rocks
Perhaps not
will
as
fall.
good as another creature, but this is going to leave Zevran with just a 1/1 on board if Keeney goes for the big smash.
I mean, there's not much else I would do here.
Same. There it goes. Crunch and crunch. And Zevran can really just look at the board and go, wow, I am getting crushed here. But there's a Vivian Monsters Advocate off the top. Perhaps a Breath of Life here as the Lovestruck Beast on the other side of the battlefield is stuck at home. Of course, the card that's really most important at this point, though, is that Great Henge, because we know the explosive ability for that to reload players' hands. If Keeney can find a creature here off the top of the library, oh, it's another forest, so nothing doing. And it's just going to be a smashing to take down both the Planeswalker and the 3/3 Beast. And we're kind of back to ground zero again. But once again, I keep looking over at the Great Henge. That's the difference maker here.
Right, exactly. I mean, it looks like haymakers, but essentially Vivian took care of that. And now I saw it on the face. Let's see. Did we draw? Oh, yeah. Creature. Let's go.
Here goes Kazandu Mammoth into Kazandu Mammoth, and Severin says, no, don't let it all fall apart. And lucky for him, it was just the 2 mammoths there, or the mammoth there, rather than finding more. So,
yeah.
Could have been worse.
It was like a DJ record scratch, right? Like you got to see the mammoth twice for some reason.
Right. I don't know why that happened. It was just the 1 into a forest, though. But look at this. An Embereth Shieldbreaker for Toralf Zevran gives him an answer to the Great Henge. And really, this happened before things got well and truly out of hand. So big time draw there from Toralf Zevran, keeping himself in this.
Yeah, decided to fire off the Shieldbreaker just because I guess just wanted the extra body, right? But didn't wait for something like an Edgewall Innkeeper. So that was a decision to make, right? Of course, you're going to get rid of the Great Henge, but it is at the cost potentially of top decking Edgewall Innkeeper and losing that card.
Toralf with Shatterskull Smashing in hand, but again, still short on the mana needed to really go crazy with it here.
Yeah, I mean, play your land. And
yep.
at least land or spell here is good, right? If you draw a land, you get to smashing away 2 creatures. This, even with the extra land, this might actually be too difficult to smash. There has been a lot of trading this game.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was worth it for Toralf to consider going for Shatterskull Smashing just on the ooze, but no matter what, it was going to be too big. And it looks like the Scavenging Ooze may be able to take over this board because there's Vivian off the top. Boy, these players are drawing haymakers, answers for each other's spells, but also threats keep coming. And Keeney able to really pull into the heavy lead here thanks to that Vivian. Also, taking a look at the attack with the Mammoth, the Ooze, and the Beast, you can see the fetch land in the back there. And that's going to be a GG from Toral Zevran. Zachary